Hi, this is Teddy.
And Arthur.
You're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. We need DC statehood now.
No taxation without representation. Go DC!
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and today I am very excited to have some youth activists who are fighting for DC statehood. So we have a couple of people on the line with us today. We have Demi Stratmon. Hi, Demi.
Hi, how are you?
Great. And also joining us is Jamal Holtz. Hi, Jamal.
Hi, hello.
So, of course, I say youth because you're much younger than I am, but youth, of course, doesn't mean like 12 or anything. So let's start by talking a little bit about your backgrounds, a little bit about sort of who you are and how you got involved in political activism.
Okay, I'll start. So I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and just growing around kind of the Capitol, you kind of always see politics around you. But since it's the focal point of everything, you kind of just push it back and you don't pay attention as much. And it was kind of until I got into high school and I started taking U.S. history classes and D.C. history classes, I noticed that D.C. was left out of a lot that was happening, although we were the capital. I learned that we really didn't have any representation or people in government representing locals just like me, and that's how I kind of got involved. I went to school. I went to Dartmouth College, and I studied government, and now I'm kind of trying to use my degree and practice politics and try to make, everything better with my degree.
Excellent. How about you, Jamal?
So, Kelly, I'm going to be frank. I started out wanting to be a FBI agent. I used to watch Criminal Minds. A lot, and that was my inspiration. But when I was at the age of 16, I joined this civic engagement program called the Mayor's Youth Leadership Institute, now called the Marion Barry Youth Leadership Institute. And I started to learn the importance of civic engagement. Then I started to just reflect on my own personal values and some of the stuff and challenges that my family faced, from economic disparities to affordable housing crisis and everything else, to ensure that my mom had a quality of life for her kids. And I started to realize these problems were bigger than just my household and were within my communities. So that's when I thought that my only way of making impact was through politics, and inspiring me to one day be mayor of Washington, D.C. But that was my impact, learning from my own personal self, but also finding ways to get civically engaged within my community. And I started to see the issues that mattered the most to the residents of Washington, D.C., and I wanted to make impact through politics.
So you're now working with an organization called 51 for 51. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and what the goal is?
Sure. So 51 for 51 is a political movement, and we're specifically asking for D.C. to become a state with 51 votes in the Senate.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and say we've been volunteering for the campaign and doing a lot of movement across states to talk to presidential candidates to get them to support the 51 vote in the Senate to break the filibuster so D.C. residents can have access to full democracy. So that's pretty much the goal of it, is to not only talk about D.C. statehood and what a democracy looks like for D.C. residents, but to talk about it with breaking the filibuster and making the 51 votes in the Senate.
What are some of the arguments for D.C. becoming a state?
Well, I'll just start off with kind of the big ones. First, we have no representation in U.S. Congress right now. We don't have House of Representatives and we don't have senators. And when you look at that, that means that we don't have a voice for a lot of the key issues going on in the country right now. We kind of have to just sit back and see what other states decide for us, kind of like we're locked in a bubble, when real life situations that these bills are covering impact D.C. residents just like they impact other individuals in this country. And that's one of the main ones. I guess another reason you could say is we're being taxed. And with that, I feel like personally for me, it kind of sucks when I see that I'm working and, you get back you get your check and you see that federal income tax is being taken out and your state. But it kind of feels like, for what? I kind of feel like that money is just being taken and I have no say to what it's actually going to. So those are two reasons why I'm really passionate about the movement.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think it's a human rights issue and it's a human rights crisis that DC residents face. When you compare us, I think we have a larger population than Wyoming and Vermont. We pay more federal income taxes than 23 other states. But even greater, I think when we talk about some of the issues and the things that happen within our city, such as gun laws, and when we see crisis from an economic standpoint, where we talk about abortion and everything else, those all have opportunities to be overturned by other Congress members and senators from different states. And I think that's very unfair. So if we look at Florida residents and they pass a local law, that local law pretty much stands, right? Here in D.C., when we pass local laws, and we've been tried many times before, it has the opportunity to be overturned by folks who don't even live or work here, like 700,000 residents who do.
It's interesting you mentioned earlier, Demi, that when you live in D.C., you're sort of surrounded by politics all the time. But do you think that this lack of representation actually helps sort of disenfranchise people? I mean, it literally disenfranchises them, but also sort of keeps them from wanting to be fully engaged in the politics, in the government that they're surrounded by all the time?
For sure. I think that it benefits a lot of people to make sure that D.C. is not a state. There's a reason why you hear Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump saying that they don't want D.C. to be a state. It's because we have vibrant voices in this city. We have people who are willing to do the work and to fight for what they believe in. And it's kind of easy when you don't really have to listen to those voices and you can play big government and just do what you want with these 700,000 residents and not really listen to their interests and know that there will be no repercussions. And I think that's kind of when we talk about 700,000 residents aren't fully engaging in a democracy. They're not really having say in what's happening to their day-to-day lives. And there is a reason why Republicans and different officials like this, and they want this to continue to be the status quo. So I truly do believe that they want D.C. residents to walk around, see the monument, see the White House, the Capitol building, and at the end of the day, not have a space or place in any of these institutions.
I think in addition to being I think what makes DC is not the political town that we are, but I think what makes DC is the culture that it embraces amongst the 700,000+ residents who live here. But the perception that we always get, especially when you hear it on the news, is that people in Washington did this, people in Washington did this. Those people aren't the people who live here. Those are people who come here once a month and vote here at the Capitol Hill. But those people in Washington and the perception of what it is totally like fraud. We also have a culture and embrace the daily lifestyle of being a DC resident that's much bigger than just the White House and the Capitol. Yeah, and I would love to just piggyback on that and say people are living their day-to-day lives in D.C. and people are going to school and they're impacted by the public school system and people have jobs that they go to. And it's a lot of everyday people living in this city who don't have a voice and who are overpowered by individuals who are being sent from their states to D.C. And that's kind of blocking the voices of local residents.
I believe it was in 2016, the D.C. residents voted overwhelmingly that they wanted to become a state. But when you look at polls of the country, it seems that for whatever reason, public sentiment around the country, is still, for some reason, opposed to DC statehood. Do you have any sense of why that disconnect might be? And, of course, there's this very unfair part of it that it's the people outside of DC who are going to get to determine whether or not DC becomes a state.
I think there's many nuances that go into it, right? I think one, we got to understand when you do any type of polling that the data is always going to be skewed. But two, I also think that when you look at the data and those who did have input in it, I think the problem is that that there's a misinformation of communication going on, right? I think a lot of people don't know the issues that we face in the district. A lot of people don't know the ins and outs and some of the stuff that we work through. That there are living residents who live and work here and pay more federal taxes than many other cities and states. But I think what we got to understand is that the whole point of this 51 campaign is not to only go out and talk about 51 votes in the Senate, but it's also to talk about why we should be the 51st state. And then it's having these conversations about some of the issues that exist in D.C. and some of the barriers that we face as D.C. residents. I think the polls will start to change once we start to continue to make the movements and inform people of what it actually means to be a D.C. resident.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I love being on this campaign. It's because we travel to different states, and yeah, sometimes we do get to talk to presidential candidates, but that's not most of our time. Most of the time we're interacting with local residents of Iowa and local residents of South Carolina, and we get to explain, hey, I was born and raised in D.C. I'm a normal American citizen. I do this. I'm just like you. I'm not a U.S. senator. I'm not from a family of a House of Representative. I'm truly a typical U.S. American citizen, and I don't have the same rights as you. And once you come from that perspective, and when we have been talking to local residents in different states and regions, people really connect with us. And all the responses that I have been given is, of course, like, I think you should be able to have the same form of political representation as I do. And once we get that narrative out there and we finally get people to disconnect Washington from Capitol Hill and the White House and from actually the people who live here and the local residents, then I think we can bridge that gap and the polling will go a completely different direction. But before that happens, we can't ask questions and with no formal background. So that's my stance on it.
It's also important to note that this was also the very first national poll ever done on D.C. statehood. And I think the positive to that is that we also see that the conversation has started nationally, right? I think that it's good that we have folks talk about this movement and issue nationally. But Kelly, I just want to add that when we look at some of the stuff that goes through our Congress and look at stuff like the government shutdown that costs the D.C. region $1.6 billion just to operate during the government shutdown, that had no expenses on us. When we look at things where the budget on federal prisons were looking to be peeled back on, and that was overturned by the Republican Party, I think those issues where D.C. could have had a voice in, when we look at things like DACA and those other things, those issues that D.C. could have had a voice in the Senate, we didn't. And I think that's important to note, that these close votes that affect all Americans, whether you're a D.C. resident, whether you're an Arkansas resident, and so on, those issues affect us as well, but yet we don't have a voice in that. So,
you mentioned talking to presidential candidates and asking them for support. Can you talk a little bit about that, what you're doing there, and which candidates you've gotten to talk to?
We got to talk to a list, a lot of them. We so far got the support of 11 presidential candidates. Some notable ones like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand.
Being out on the field, I've had the opportunity to talk to, personally, Senator Harris, Senator Booker, and tons more. And it's been really nice. A lot of presidential candidates support D.C. becoming a state. However, we want them to support the specific 51 votes in the Senate, because we're trying to give a specific way for D.C. to become a state. Yes, it's fine and dandy that you support it. Okay, but let's make it happen. Would you support this 51 votes in the Senate being the means and ways to get to that? So having that specific conversation with presidential candidates gets a little tricky, and it really shows who is in it for the long haul and who really wants to see it happen and happen swiftly, and who's kind of scared by that specific measure.
Yeah, and I'll add, some folks that we also got on board were folks like Representative Tim Ryan, Governor Bullock, Representative John Delaney, Governor Inslee, Andrew Yang, Mayor de Blasio, and Governor Hickenlooper, and Eric Swalwell. He's not in the race anymore, but those are some folks that supported 51 votes in the Senate for 51st state. When we talked to folks like Michael Bennett, he wasn't in favor of breaking the filibuster to get 51 votes in the Senate. When we talked to Cory Booker, he tells us he supports D.C. statehood, but the 51 votes in the Senate is something he needs to think about. So my thing is, if we can do 51 votes for Supreme Court justices, then we can do 51 votes to give people access to the full democracy they deserve.
Right now in the House, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is the non-voting member of Congress from D.C., has introduced legislation. It's H.R. 51, and there's a ton of co-sponsors, all Democrats, of course. But what will happen as of right now, as far as everyone can tell, is that the House may very well pass that this calendar year, but then it will go to the Senate where, like everything else that the House passes, it will just languish. So is the idea then that once there are 51 senators who would approve this, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess they would all be Democrats, but who knows, maybe bipartisanship will come back to the country, that then the Senate would be able to do it with just those 51 votes.
Yeah, that's kind of our mission, kind of our goal. We've seen that Republicans will do anything in their favor to push this back as far as they can. And that's why we're specifically trying to break that filibuster, because with that in place, it just prolongs the process.
Yeah, and I think when you think about Eleanor's introduction of H.R. 51, I think the good thing is that, yes, she does have over 200 sponsors on this. I mean, years ago, if this wasn't the case, this is actually a record number. So I think the positive side to look at is that, yes, we do know typically that things get trapped in the House once they're passed. But the good thing is that there's a record number of sponsors, and there's a record number of the amount of people that's talking about D.C. statehood. And then when you look at things like the Senate, Mitch McConnell made an exception to the rules to give the nominees from Trump nominees to the Supreme Court access to that Supreme Court by giving them 51 votes, right? So those are things that we should be doing, not to go around the political conversation, but those are things we should be doing for democracy and giving folks, like, there's not only Democrats who live here, there's also Republicans who live here. Yeah. But the point is, it's not a Democrat or Republican issue, it's a humanitarian and public issue that we all face as residents. I think, again, we pay federal taxes just like our next door neighbors, Maryland and Virginia, but we should also have the same rights and opportunities like they do. Yeah, so we really just need, if we know that Republicans are pushing back, we need Democrats to be very bold and to fight for the right for democracy in our country. And that means to not let Mitch McConnell try to push it back in the Senate if it gets passed by the House. We need bold Democrat leaders to get in there and actually make sure that we can get a vote on it. What are some concrete things you would like people who are listening to this to do to help out your cause? I think we would like them, one, to inform them, not only themselves on the issue and some of the stuff that we face as D.C. residents, but also to talk about it to the people that live within their communities and also to their representatives. I think the squeaky wheel gets the oil going. I think once we continue to have conversations, continue to ask why, and continue to do the research, then the oil keeps going and the word and the message keeps going. So I would like folks to inform themselves on the issues, but also to be a part of the issue. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's also another thing to be a part of the cause. So we would like folks to be a part of the cause. So visit the website, 51for51.org, to look more into the work that we're doing and the impact that we're making. Yeah, and if you want to just take a step further, after informing yourselves,
contact your House of Representatives and your senators, because one of the reasons why DC is fighting to become a state is because we don't have that advocate. We don't have someone that we can write a letter to or contact from our state. So if you would contact your House of Representatives from your state or your county, your district, and your senators and let them know that you support DC becoming a state and you think that your district or your state should as well, that would mean a lot, and that helps us out by getting the conversation started on the Hill. So that would also be nice.
For the millennials and young folks who have Twitter, we're on Twitter as well at 51 for 51 to just keep up with that and learn from issues from that platform as well.
Are there, as you've been going around and talking to people, are there particular arguments that you have heard against DC being a state and or against using the threshold of 51 senators to make this happen?
Yeah, I don't necessarily say I've heard any issues. I think what we heard a lot is misinformation. When we hear reasons on why people don't want us to be a state, then we correct them and tell them why we should. So
yeah, it's a lot of misinformation, for sure. That's kind of it. It's not really a lot of DC residents fighting to have more rights and have more community. But when they hear different things being thrown out that they haven't been able to solve, then that kind of becomes the issue regarding what will happen if their lives would change in a significant way. So that's kind of all that we're hearing.
We haven't heard a fact yet, Kelly.
I mean, I can't think of any good reasonable arguments for it not to be a state, but and you have your logo is what the state would look like as a state, so people could see it's kind of a diamond with a chunk cut out of it.
Yeah, that's also just like the shape of the district right now. It's already a well-known symbol, so, but I love that interpretation that she gave. I'll take that and run with it.
The 51 for 51 organization has a lot of partners in this fight too. A lot of people who want to help make sure that DC becomes a state and is well represented. And a lot of ones that I think would be very familiar to people: Indivisible and March for Our Lives, DC Vote, Democracy for America. So this is a movement that has a growing support behind it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we talk about or that people know about your movement?
I would just like to say that the momentum of this campaign and this political movement has really been expiring. We are now seeing people take on to this, not only in D.C., but around the country. And we just want to make sure that people get their right information. People can always contact us and join. And that's kind of my view.
Yeah. And those folks who are listening now and would love to be sponsors of this, feel free to reach out to us, whether if it's Facebook, Twitter, or our website, 51 for 51. We're open to it. But also when we think about folks like the Iowans for DC statehood, we need more chapters like that across the states to start their own chapters and keep this movement going.
And I would also like to comment that a lot of different political movements have always been happening in D.C., but since we don't really have a voice nationally, they're not really exposed. But for example, right now, there's also a very well-known movement going on called Don't Mute D.C. from local residents who are dealing with issues such as gentrification. So if you would just like to do any research about D.C. and what it's like to actually be a local resident and not to be a part of, I guess, what we call Washington, dealing with the Capitol and dealing with the White House, a lot of local residents are doing great work as well.
The real people of Washington.
Excellent. And I think everyone should also go buy one of your tote bags that says "No more taxation without representation." Because, we fought a whole war over that. So it's important.
Some people forget.
All right. Well, Jamal and Demi, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. I think this is a super important issue that not enough people are thinking about. And I hope that everyone will check out your website and follow you guys on Twitter and Facebook, and then talk to everyone you know. I've got now on my bag a pin that's got 51 and the little shape of the diamond with the bite taken out of it. So I'm hoping more and more people will start asking me about it, and I can tell them all about how excited I am about DC statehood.
Yeah, we're going to be in Detroit soon, so we're coming to a city near you. So follow our feedback and our Twitter pages and everything. And I'll just give a personal brag. My Twitter and everything is at Jamal Holtz, JamalHoltz. That's me. I'm talking about DC and DC statehood and the issues that exist here in our city all the time.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to hearing about more and more presidential candidates that you get on board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for having us.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.